So, full disclaimer, in today's episode, I had a camera malfunction. My camera one went down like really before we actually started. So, just wanted to let you know I still chose to send this out. And so, it'll just kind of look a little different this week, but I still wanted to deliver the content to you. So, I hope you can still enjoy it. Over the last few years, actually, I have pastors connect with me quite frequently and asking, do I have worship leaders being developed? And especially in the time that I served at Kansas Christian College, I would get that too. Like, do you have anybody in your institute, your worship institute, your worship programs being developed for we have a need in our church? And so, man, I see a huge need for development of worship leaders in our city specifically. And so that's why today I have on the show another special guest, my buddy Ben from Grace Church here in the Kansas City area. Grace Church has many locations, and Ben is the worship arts director over all campuses. And something I've admired about Grace Church is the ability that they do, or the work that they put in for developing leaders to be sent out. And they do this through many ways. But today I want to talk about internships and residencies. And so, man, I think you will enjoy this episode. Today I have Ben on the show with me, and in case you don't know, like, this is why I've created this show. You have to know your why in order to determine your what. I'm a firm believer in that, and so my why that I feel like is from the Lord is to create a culture, a thriving culture where worshipers are raised up in character, competence, and cognitive health. And I say those three things on purpose because we all hear about character and competence. Psalm 78, 72, he moves David from shepherding his sheep to shepherding God's people with integrity of heart, skillful hand. That's been an impactful verse. But one thing I also want to take a stab at is the cognitive health. Like, there's just so much mental health that goes into, especially I think creatives, and it can be a lonely place. And so anyways, that's kind of the why, and the how that I plan to try to do this is offer coaching for worship leaders and create content, transformative content, and then connecting to churches in need. So that's kind of the why and the how. But, so how I met Ben was just a few years ago. I was in a season of transition. And first of all, I just want to give a shout out to Grace Church, because I've heard this from so many people that it's a place where you can come and rest and heal. And even though our stint there was short, that was so true of us. We were in a season of transition and hurt. And man, just to be able to come and sit there, and I just felt it was just an emotional time and a healing time. And so I connected with Ben, I was going to the North Campus and you were primarily at the South Campus at that time. But I remember connecting with you because I was just, okay, God, what next? And I wanted to find out more about the residency programs and stuff like that. And so we're going to get to that here in a second, because that's just always fascinated me at how well Grace does that. And so I have some questions for you. But first of all, Ben, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, who you are, hobbies, dirty secrets? No, I'm just joking. But yeah, tell us
My
a little
dirty
bit.
secrets would be I love Krispy Kreme donuts, and Five Guys those are two of my vices. So ministry life for me started leading worship in some capacity in 1994, 95 when I was 20-year-old kid. So yeah, you do the math. I'm close to 50. Mm-hmm. So at this point in my life,
you look great.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, so I started leading. I received Christ as my savior when I was 18, 19 years old. And music was something I loved. I was very passionate about growing up, and I was playing in bands and that kind of
Yeah.
thing as a young, out of high school, young college kid. And I was playing in bars in Kansas City. I'd have to have my mom come because I was
Oh,
under
yeah.
the age of
Yeah.
21.
Was
And
that a
then
buzzkill at all? Or?
no,
That's
it was
awesome, though.
okay. It's kind of fun to tell that
That's
story
awesome.
just because I'm like, well, my mom supported me and she loved me, and
Yeah.
it wasn't the best environment to be in, but like I
Yeah.
did that for 3 months, and then
Wow.
Christ said, "Yeah, you can do something different."
That's
And
cool.
yeah, so in my journey of becoming a worship leader, during that time, music was kind of like an idol to me. It
Mm.
was the thing that I worshipped, and so in my young Christian life, as I became a disciple and understanding what it meant to follow Jesus and understanding, what worship meant was those things that are the most important on your heart.
Mm.
What is it that rules your heart? I took all of the gear and all of the stuff that I did, and I donated it to our local church's missions
Wow.
garage sale. And I kept my 12-string
Hmm.
Alvarez guitar,
Really?
and I was like, yeah, music's done. I'm done with music.
Hmm.
It's, and then it was probably about a year after that, I was involved in like a young, in the 90s, it was called college and career class,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
which was like a young adults
Yeah.
type
Yeah.
thing. So the leader of that class was like, hey, let's put together a band. And then they discovered that I did that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I started exploring what it meant to be a worship leader. And we assembled a group of people that all had the talents and the gifts, and they wanted to figure that out. And, that was the era before the worship wars
Mm.
of the late
Right.
90s.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, we were in a very traditional church.
Mm.
It was hymns and piano and organ, choir, and that kind of thing. So we
Mm-hmm.
became kind of the folks in the basement that were making too much noise at that time. And so we went through that whole process. And for me personally, it was an awesome time of growth, being able to really discover what it meant to follow God, and was I willing to surrender the things I loved most.
Mm.
And I
Mm.
was, and I did. And
Mm-hmm.
then God was like, okay, you can actually use this for
Wow.
for my honor and my glory to lead my church, my
Mm-hmm.
children in worship. So
Mm.
so doing that was just awesome. So so I've done that for, gosh, almost
Phew, yeah.
27 years or so. I
Yeah.
don't, I'm not, math is not my
Yeah.
strong suit,
No,
but
me neither.
it's been a long time.
Yeah.
Let's just
Yeah.
say it that way. And I have a family, a wonderful family of, I have an awesome wife that I've known, and she helped lead me to Christ
Oh,
back when I
wow.
was in high school, out of high school.
Mm.
And we had 3 daughters. My oldest passed away in December this
Mm.
past year.
Mm-hmm.
But I've got 2 awesome girls right now that I
Yeah.
love dearly. And I've been in ministry with Grace Church out in Overland Park, since on staff since 2004.
Wow.
I started leading worship there in 2001.
Wow.
So yeah,
Yeah.
my role has changed significantly
Yeah.
since then. But yeah,
All girls.
all
Like,
girls.
and you still have your hair. So
I do.
that's
Well,
impressive.
it's under this hat. I promise there is hair. I'm not going to take it off, but I do have some. Yeah,
Girls are
it's
great.
yeah, it's very gray.
Yes.
And
Yeah. I'm getting gray too. So
yeah, I shaved my beard Friday, so
Ah,
it was just down to here. And it was
nice.
completely gray, but
Nice.
I did a reset.
Reset.
So,
Well, man, one of the things, so over your years of at Grace, and you said your roles changed quite a bit. And
mhm.
one thing, this is a little off our topic, but I wanted to ask it, is
Mhm.
like, how do you, as a multi-site church, four campuses, 5?
We've got 3 in person, and then we dedicate a lot of time to what we do online as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So how do you kind of balance? So a couple weeks ago, I had a buddy on, Daniel, and it was from a volunteer's perspective. And one of the takeaways that he shared was like, he wants worship leaders to know that volunteers love creativity. And sometimes when we get into the business of church,
Mhm.
especially multi-campus, I've been on a church multi-campus, and some of the struggle is how to remain consistent and also enable autonomy.
Yeah.
So kind of,
Yep.
and I don't even want to say brand,
Mm-hmm.
but the brand has a place in it.
Mm-hmm.
So how have you guys been able to kind of model that, the autonomy, so it's not just cookie cutter, but
Mm-hmm.
yet keeping a consistent.
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say it's a painstaking progression. And when we built our first building, because we used to meet in a school
Okay.
from like 1990 when we started, in 97 when they came out to Overland Park, then in 2006 we actually moved into our first building,
Okay.
which is what is called now our South Overland Park
Oh, yeah.
campus. And so when we built that building, we instantly doubled. Anytime you build a building in a community, the trend has always been, I don't know why, but it seems like you just double. So we doubled. And so then we began looking at, okay, we need to probably look at adding services. So we did that. And then in my mind, and in within our ministry planning, we thought, okay, where should we as leaders begin looking towards the future? What does the future look like? And what would it take for you in those moments where we're at that moment in 2006, doubling and adding services? What would it look like if we were to build another campus or another church location somewhere?
Right.
And so in my progression of trying to explore that and figure it out, I began meeting with people like yourself. I just like when you came to me and
Right.
you're like, hey, let's just talk.
Yeah.
I would get on the phone and I would try to meet with other worship pastors and worship leaders in the Kansas City area that were, their ministries have grown quite a bit. And I was trying to explore their failures, their successes. What did they love about what they're doing, and what do they not like?
Right.
And the multi-site people or worship directors and pastors that I had talked to that were involved in a multi-site campus scenario where the teaching or the message is the same at every location, or it's by video or that kind of thing. The worship leader's biggest frustration, and they weren't necessarily, complaining about it. I want to make sure I speak clearly in case one of them ever sees that. I never received that as like they complained. I think it was more of a, they withered frequently on the vine when they weren't being a part of crafting a worship service in the sense of, okay, let me take my local congregation on a journey during my 25 to 30 minutes in an hour and 15 or an hour and a half service or whatever. And oftentimes what they would tell me they felt like was, I feel like I'm a jukebox, or I'm being told what to do and what to sing, versus being a part of crafting a worship service. Because I think a lot of times worship leaders, people who want to be leaders of worship, and there are people that just like to sing and like to perform or like to do those things, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to be someone who's really involved, that can definitely wither you, right? So in our journey towards trying to figure out a path, I was really trying to explore and listen to those things. And that was something I would hear frequently. So as we began to plant our campuses, I was, trying to craft a plan that would do what you're talking about, which is take the charge that I was given as the kind of like director of worship of Grace Church as a whole. How do you take that DNA and worship culture of who we are as a church and place it in another community? What does that look like? Because communities are different, right? But at the same time, you want people to identify when they go into a different Grace Church location, they could walk in and go, oh, that's Grace Church, right? How do you do that tangibly? There's tangible ways to do that. And it's, we've come up with a few things that are working right now, but I will say that I don't think anybody ever arrives, because culture shifts and changes so frequently. I know that what we're doing now, I think in 5 years, is probably going to need to change in some way. I don't know necessarily how or what, but tangible ways that that we have identified to be helpful is the song selection, like the songs that we choose to play. Now, they can be executed differently at the campuses based on their communities. For instance, if we've got a campus or location that's in Olathe that maybe they don't have a they don't have an awesome drummer that's just so skilled or talented. So they
Mhm.
may be more of an acoustic type vibe
Mhm.
sometimes, so they may execute the songs differently that identify or fit with what their needs are, what they have available to them. But they're still choosing the same song, so that if someone who was in Olathe were to go visit one of our other campuses, they would go, "Oh, I know that song," right? So it's
Right.
instantly
Yeah.
they're a part of Grace Church. So that was one tangible way that
Mm.
we tried to execute that idea that we can take worship culture of Grace Church to different locations.
That's good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's been it's been a journey because it wasn't like that initially. So what we do with our worship directors, and those are the people that are on staff at the individual
Right.
campuses, we get with them, we being the campus support, which
Mhm.
is a lot of churches call it central,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
So those particular worship directors are like within our organizational structure, they're dotted lines maybe to me
Okay.
as that, but they report directly to that individual campus pastor. So they're
Right.
very involved in their community, right? And their
Yeah.
staff at that local church. So what we'll do from a campus support side is we'll meet with them once a quarter, and we just grab lunch together, and we sit and talk about things. What's going on? What are your biggest pluses? What are the things we need to talk about as a team that we can help each other?
Mm.
And then we'll spend the afternoon. We pick 3 new songs a quarter.
Hmm.
And we all agree to those. So they come already prepared, having listened to a list of probably 15 songs.
Okay.
And then they come in and they pick their top 3 out of that list of
Nice.
maybe 15. And so then they also get ideas from their teams.
Okay.
So they're charged with involving their volunteers
Yeah,
and
that's
being a part
good.
of it, because we want them to also
Right.
have some stake or some say in
Mhm.
what we're selecting. So they get ideas from their teams, and if they don't get ideas from their teams, if they don't respond, then
Right.
the worship director gets to
Yeah.
bring those. But so they'll bring them, and then sometimes we'll meet, and it may take 30 minutes because we're like, we all love these songs, and
Yeah.
these are the 3 we're choosing. And then there'll be sometimes it's like, okay, this is going to take us a couple hours to
Yeah.
really hash out and talk about, because each individual has their own preferences as a worship
Right.
leader. And sometimes that can get it can get hairy from time to time, because as musicians, as you know, and if I'm going way off track, you just stop me.
Yeah.
But I'm just
Yeah.
going,
No,
okay.
yeah.
But as musicians, oftentimes we get bored sometimes with what we're playing.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, like 3 chords in the truth sometimes isn't enough to feed
Yeah.
our.
Yeah.
I like to tell them, I'm like, I'll remind them, hey guys, don't be so
Yeah.
pretentious. I
Yeah.
get it. We all sometimes want that depth, and we kind of have to remind ourselves that. I say that I do that as the old guy that sits and goes, okay, children, you've argued for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Let's discuss. Chris Tomlin is not that bad.
Yeah.
So so we'll wrestle with that sometimes,
Mhm.
but it's always a healthy discussion.
Yeah.
And we have a great, because it's collaboration.
Yeah.
And it's a team environment, and it gives that kind of that thing that I was talking about earlier, those
Right.
worship leaders that I used to talk to that would just feel like they were alone, they were isolated,
Mm.
they didn't really have any part of deciding what their church was singing. And they were just told from their campus support or central, you're doing these 4 songs and you're doing them at this length, and we're going to send you the tracks, do them this way, and don't even
Right.
go away from that. So
Mhm.
so I feel like we've landed in a really good spot right now that's very healthy for our team. And so we pick the songs, those 3 new songs, and we all then decide, we do them all the same weekend, those 3 new songs.
Oh, cool.
So at every campus, we're doing the same new song
Yeah.
the same weekend. We roll it out 2 weeks in a row, take a week off, and then we put it back for the 3rd week. And by then
Nice.
we'll know this is not working, or this
Yeah.
is a great song. And then
Yeah.
after that, they can pick however often they want to do it at their campus.
Nice.
So then we have a list of 25 songs that son is just like,
Yeah.
hey,
It's like,
Curtis has the glory of the Lord on him.
yeah, that's the time change too. I
Yeah.
think,
Oh, that's true. That's right. Yeah. So we'll then what we do is we have the new songs, 3 new. Then we
Mhm.
have what we call, like, I can't remember exactly what we call it. We've called it different things, but newer songs. And that's when the next quarter, those 3 songs drop down to this list,
Okay.
right? So these are
Yeah.
the songs from the previous quarters that we say, hey, you have to do one of these every weekend. So it's a
Yeah.
list of like, I think like 7 to 10. So
Okay.
every week they're supposed to do one of those from that list in
Yeah.
addition to that new song,
Yeah.
that they do 3 times. And then we call our old standards, right?
Right.
And that every quarter we get together, we also sit and go, okay, what are some old songs that we can bring back? Let's blow the
Oh,
dust off
cool.
of,
I like that.
I say Chris Tomlin, like Whom Shall I Fear,
Yeah.
or Cornerstone, or,
Yeah.
so we'll drop like 5 of those in, and we'll take 5 off and drop
Nice.
5 newer, older songs
Right.
in there. And then we have a section of like 5 hymns that they
Hmm.
can do. And then,
Man,
so
I love that.
yeah, so we've landed on that, and it's been really great. So, but the thing is, they have to pick from that. So we
Yeah.
all agree. So that's the tangible way. We've just tried to figure out, how do you give a worship leader or worship director, even a volunteer who's a worship leader at a campus, how do you establish the sandbox barrier,
Right.
or how far out do you go while you give them the ability to have that autonomy of
Mm-hmm.
being a part of creating and crafting a worship service, taking them on a journey
Yeah.
of a beginning to an end in the service. And not just being told what to sing.
Right.
They're being told what to sing, which is, you got to choose from these
Right.
songs, but you get to craft it from this set
Exactly.
list. So
Yeah.
hopefully then we're instilling a tangible way of Grace Church culture of worship at each individual campus, while giving them a sense of autonomy. So,
Yeah. Man,
long answer, but there you go.
No, I love that because like I have something sort of similar in terms of like I have a Google sheet, and I have a master list of about 20 songs. Says we typically do 4 at the most. So like it kind of depends on how many songs you're doing that determines how big your master list is. And then I have a B list or seasonal, and that's sort of like the oldies that you're talking about, but I don't really cap that. If those are ones that I feel like, okay, they're still played on the radio a lot, or they're hymns, or ones that, people probably would know.
Yeah.
And in large, I tell my point worship leaders, like, okay, if we're doing 4 songs, try to have at least 50 to 75% coming from the master list of the 20, and then 25 to 50% coming from the but then I even have formulas in there of when the song was introduced, how many possible Sundays it could have been done, and how many times it has been done. So then it gives you a percentage of how the song's tracking. It's kind of nerdy.
Yeah, it is.
I got
love
that. I got that from my buddy Brent Copeland. Shout out if you're watching this, because then you have tangible, like, I feel like we've done that song so many times. Actually, data shows that
Technically speaking, we've only done this 7 times.
Right.
I love that. That's
and I don't
fantastic.
always track songs as well, like, that should, but it gives me kind of like the guardrails, so I love that, man.
Yeah.
So we're talking about developing leaders, and that was one of the things I said early on, is like, man, I get pastors connect with me fairly regularly, especially when I was at Kansas Christian College. Like, we had a worship institute we were trying to develop, and so I would get pastors like see that, they would connect with me. Hey, do you have anybody in the pipeline, or anybody you're developing? Because we're a small church, so-and-so place, and we need some help. And unfortunately, I never had anybody in the pipeline, but I get those questions from pastors, like, and so I feel like there's this ever-growing need of churches being planted, or ever-growing, churches are being planted quite a bit. And then there's this huge need that feels like worship leaders, it feels like, aren't being developed at the rate of.
It's a gap there.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, God, what is my part to play in that? And so that's what I want to kind of ask you, like, how did this idea of residencies and internships kind of, because you've been at Grace for quite some time, so how did this kind of, like, hey, we want to try this to develop and raise up leaders?
Yeah, I think if I were to think back to when that started at our church as an organization, I think it was birthed out of us beginning to plant campuses. And then we had a very aggressive goal of, our senior pastor had this desire and vision. And we talked about it as a pastoral team. It was like, feel like God is calling us to really pursue planting 100 churches in 20 years.
Wow.
Now, what that looks like, the definition of a church
Sure.
could be a campus. It could be, hey, we're sending out some missionaries to the other side of the world. So,
Mhm.
so we've, that was a very aggressive thing to accomplish. So with that goal comes, well, how are you going to do that?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
going to take people.
Right.
And so, so then we began talking about a resident type program. We had just started doing summer internships.
Okay.
We did that. I think we started 10 years ago.
Wow.
2013 was the first time we brought in summer interns. And
Nice.
it was great, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah.
You think you're going to get help as a staff member,
Oh,
but in reality, you're doing yours, and then you're training a young
right.
person to do it, and then they're gone after
Right.
learning
Hmm.
how to do it for 2 weeks.
Mhm.
Anyways, the residency program, I think we started. I know for our worship side, I think our first residence started in the summer of like the end of the summer of 2018 through the following summer of 19.
Hmm.
And Charla Pear is her name. She's now a worship leader at one of the Christ Community
Oh,
campuses.
really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Wow.
we didn't actually have a campus that we were launching at the time
Mhm.
that her residency came to an end. So we always tell our residents as they're coming on, I think sometimes we want to make sure the expectation bar is set for them to understand that as you're joining our residency, it does not necessarily mean that
Right.
it's not a promise that you're going to be a
Sure.
part of a
Yeah.
Grace Church campus launch or anything,
Right.
because if we're not launching it, there's just
Right.
not there. But there is the potential that you're building a experience and your individual resume and being able to really be a part of something that what we're doing. And we just love being able to train other people.
Mm.
And like I said before we started, like I love
Mhm.
being able to teach people about my mistakes and my
Mm.
failures and the dumb things I've done
Right.
so they can
Yeah.
learn from
Yeah.
those.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that has been we've seen, let's see, I'm thinking 1, 2, 3 since 2018. I mean, I've seen all of our residents have been have been joined either other churches or they've joined one of our campuses
Mm.
as a staff member, as a worship leader. So that's
Wow.
been pretty awesome to see. So we've done that since then, probably
Yeah.
2018, 2019.
Man, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, like, here's I've been really toying with this recently because at our small church plant called Two or More Church, we probably 50 to 60 people, maybe 80. But like one thing that's unique about us is we have several college age, high schoolers. So one of my nieces, she's 17, she's a senior, plays and sings, super gifted. The whole family is.
Yeah.
She was leading one Sunday. This has been about a month ago, and her grandpa was in town. Just it coincided because I think there's Grandparents' Day that weekend. Anyway, so then they stayed over and came to church, and we got together in small groups after church after our service. It's kind of what we do, highs and lows and stuff.
Mhm.
Anyways, he posed this. He's like, "Now I'm kind of curious what you guys are about here at Two or More Church. Like, are you kind of a training ground? Because I've visited a few different times, and it seems like there's always somebody different preaching.
Mm.
There's different worship leaders, and he says it's all
Mhm.
been great, but
Yeah.
I just like you could tell he wasn't used to that. Like he's
Mhm.
used to probably seeing one person,
Yeah.
and I thought that was a compliment
Yeah.
because I was like, okay, well, people, it's evident to
Mhm.
people, it's what we're trying to do. So from
Yeah.
a small church with limited resources, this is what I wanted to ask you: is how could we do do some type of residency or internship
Mhm.
with not the resources that Grace
Yeah.
has?
Right.
What would you suggest to start that up?
Yeah. Well, I think it's difficult when we when I, let's okay, I'll go to before we had a residency.
Okay.
And it was probably 13 years ago, 2010, I knew that the day was coming that we were going to be doing something.
Mhm.
It was just on our radar off
Mm.
in the distance of church planting or whatever. And I ran across an individual who was attending our church, who I found out had been a previous worship leader. Like you had mentioned that for you, it was Grace was a place of healing.
Right.
It was the same, very similar story.
Mm-hmm.
Was a part of a ministry at a church, and sometimes the pressure for churches and church leadership to have numbers, to perform, to meet certain expectations that are set out by a board or
Right.
an elder, group or whatever, can be incredibly difficult on a senior leader, like a senior pastor, and then the worship leader. Because if a senior pastor is feeling that pressure, then they begin to think, they get super involved in what that worship leader is doing on a week-to-week basis.
Right.
And where it becomes micromanagement, a sense or a feeling of that can happen. And so then that relationship just isn't healthy.
Right.
And I'm sure you'll do a podcast if you've not already on that dynamic.
Yeah.
So I had developed a friendship with this individual, and we went to lunch, and I heard his story, and I just invited him to, if he wanted to be a part of our worship ministry, I just invited him to be a part of it. And he auditioned, and then I asked him, I tried to identify things in my immediate world on a week-to-week basis that I could be willing to give up to allow someone else who's not on staff, what would I be comfortable with doing and allowing them to do, and begin to explore, and things like scheduling people or helping to pick songs. I think you can involve creating places and things that can involve people that aren't necessarily things that they need to be there every day for. For instance, if you were to do what we were just discussing about, like picking songs, that's an easy way in a worship ministry to allow others to be a part of a meeting like that, where you're brainstorming songs, and then you're able to impart some wisdom onto a younger person, like, hey, here's why these songs don't fit. This is why, and this is how I assemble worship services. Because what I used to do with him, and then it grew to a couple other volunteer worship leaders, and we would begin to meet, and we would craft like a month's worth of worship service sets together. And so then I was able to talk through my process, my thought process, and then they were beginning to do that with each other, and we kind of created that environment. But it was like 5 of us, like worship leaders that were just attending Grace at the time, and they were all broken from previous experiences. And we began to do that. But this specific individual was a good friend of mine, and I invested in him, and he back to me and that kind of thing. Like he would, if I needed a break, he would lead worship and those kinds of things. And so it's I think if you were to maybe not look at it as a residency program necessarily, but perhaps thinking, okay, how can I elevate the ability for people to lead and take aspects of leadership within this particular, whatever ministry you're leading? What things can I allow them to be a part of, so that you can create that place to impart your wisdom and your experience, and then help them grow. And I mean, you never know, as if you do get to a point where you're planning, or you do need a resident, there's somebody right there that could sign up for the next year or whatever.
Man, so that's good. It's looking for the transferable principles. Like, I think that was good how you phrased that, of like maybe kind of reframe how you're thinking about it. And it doesn't have to be this huge monstrosity program, it's the practical things. Like, what I heard you say, you didn't say it this way, but how can you give leadership away? And I admire that you do that. Like, that was, I came from a culture where I felt like there wasn't a lot of that happening, and it it bothered me, anyways, I don't, for sake of honor and honesty, I'm not going to dive into some of that, but yeah, I think that's so good, of just like, it's kind of always having your antenna up, like, okay, what do you see in somebody? And then how might you give them an opportunity?
I will say too, in what it allowed me as a leader at Grace Church, the ability to have that freedom to impart that kind of trust on volunteers, is having that from like our senior leadership, like my senior pastor. And if you're in a place where you're not sure, you're unsure if you have that capability, I think
Right.
you just need to go and you just need to ask, like
Mm-hmm.
imparting the vision or helping share that vision that you have for growing the particular ministry you lead. If it's worship ministry, then
Right.
go to your senior pastor and say, hey, I really want to invest in others. Are you okay? Or at what point are you willing to allow a volunteer
Yeah.
to do that? Because if I do, it means I would need flexibility
Right.
on the weekends because there will be mistakes that will happen
Mm-hmm.
or something may happen. And I
Mm-hmm.
just need to know, because I want to obviously honor you as a leader and honor my role. And I want to
Yeah.
make sure that what the work that I do is good. But at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, not every senior leader has that particular goal or mindset, right? It
Mm.
can oftentimes be, well, I need to make sure that the weekends are, they're immaculate. There's nothing that breaks, nothing
Right.
happens wrong. And if it does, like if you're a place where you
Yeah.
just know, yeah, he's not going to go for that.
Yeah.
And it may be a
Yeah.
little harder, but you can still find those ways to involve people. But
Right.
it's just figuring out where is that line. Whereas some ministries, and this is the blessing I have had, and I credit the the discipleship that I had from my senior pastor, Tim Howie at Grace, that I just remember the day he came in when we built our building, our first building. He came in, he sat in my office. I'm working in the middle of the day, and he just sits in my office after our first Easter. It was the biggest service we'd ever had in our history
Mm.
as far as attendance.
Mm-hmm.
He sat down and he just goes, I just want you to know I trust you.
Mm.
And I was like,
Wow.
yeah. He's like, yeah, I want you to hear that. I trust you.
That's huge.
And that was huge. And, and it was in that moment, and then one other one when he told me a couple of years later, he said, when we were having some dynamic problems with super uber talented musicians on our team,
Mm-hmm.
it was becoming a nightmare for me as a leader. They would perform real well on a
Right.
weekend, but they were a cancer to the rest of the team.
Mm-hmm.
And he came in and he told me, Ben, I would rather you on an acoustic guitar leading worship than a bunch of divas on the stage, because at least I would know
Yeah.
there's at least one person on that stage leading worship and worshiping God.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was freeing as well to hear that. So I say that just because to kind of give a background to the importance of the dynamic that your senior leadership and what their vision is for investing in
Right.
volunteers in that way. Because you don't want to go doing something and then you
Right.
find 3 weeks later, like, why are you doing that? Because
Right.
worship service is not going well,
Yeah. Yeah.
so you just need to make sure, I would suggest
Yeah.
talking about figuring out where that line might be. But I just want to make sure I
good.
communicated that as well.
Man, I wanted to, as we kind of start to land the plane,
Yeah.
I like some of these questions. I'm stealing some of this from Vanderblumen podcast, actually. Like some of his questions are so good. But this one's not one of his. But like, what's a song tracking currently well
Oh, yeah.
at one of your campuses?
Yeah. So I couldn't remember the name of it. So I asked my worship leaders, our
Yeah.
team today,
Yeah.
I was like, what's the song?
Yeah.
You've Already Won by Shane and Shane is what our
nice.
2 of our 3
Okay.
worship directors
Very
stated.
cool.
That one right now is just
Love anything from the
clinging to
Shanes.
that. Yeah,
man.
these guys are amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shout out to Shane and Shane
Yeah.
if you watch this.
Yep.
Dude, that's awesome.
Yeah.
What about like, so something you said early on was how you met with other worship leaders. And that's what I love. I think that's such a valuable trait, like, because it shows that you're hungry to learn and you're just looking for advice, and like that's something I did early on. When I got hired on for my first full-time worship leading job, I was like, man, this is a new realm for me. I'd been leading worship for about 7 years, but like I was still really green. So like I just remember going to different worship leaders around town, like Troy Kennedy.
Yeah,
and,
Troy's one of the guys I met with back then. 2007,
and it's just so
6.
good.
Yep.
Like, and I still have snippets that I took away from every person, and that kind of helped form my theology of worship leadership. And it's ever growing. But I also a few years ago became more into reading.
Mm.
I've never been a huge reader. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously the Bible, but so like I do get a lot of learning through reading. So is there any books that you have read or just getting ready to read or
Yeah.
just finished reading that you could recommend?
Well, I would say this, I'm not a great reader either. There's nothing that will put me to sleep better than a really great book. Like, I don't know what it is, but it makes me want to fall asleep. Uh, so
That's awesome.
it happens all the time.
Yeah.
But I will say, in my particular role, as the director of worship arts, it includes like our production
Mhm.
team, our worship leadership, and then like communications.
Oh yeah.
And so there's a lot of like marketing type stuff, social
Sure.
media, and
Okay.
those kinds of things as well. So I like to always say, within my world, I help facilitate and lead the kitty cats of the church.
Right. Right.
So all
Right.
the
Yeah.
cats,
Yeah.
and I love it so much. So for me right now, there's a book I've been reading that um, is specifically created for the communications
Mm.
side of things. But I think it can apply to anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's called Know What You're For,
Okay.
by Jeff Henderson. And
Jeff Henderson.
I
Okay.
cracked that open this past month, and I've been trying to read at least like a chapter once a week. That's how
Yeah.
much I read.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll come in on Monday morning and I'll try to read
Nice.
a chapter or two of that. It's a great book. And then the one I have sitting on my shelf is The War of Art.
I've
You've
heard
heard of
of
that?
that
Yeah.
one. Yeah. I never read that one
I
though.
haven't either. I've got
Okay.
it sitting waiting for me. So
Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
looking forward to reading that. I've had it sitting on my shelf for 2 years now. So
Nice.
I was looking at picking that back up and putting it on my
Nice.
next read. So
Yeah. What about an app? Like, is there an app that's been super beneficial to you recently?
Recently an app. I mean, I'll give you the Jesus Juke answer, which is the
Okay.
Bible app, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Use it all the time.
Oh, it's a good
Yeah,
one.
but I will say as well, I mean, Planning Center, if you don't
Mm,
have a good, whatever
that's
tool
true.
you use to organize your team,
Right.
you should be using something. And
And
Planning Center
that's
is where
such
we
a
landed.
good one.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I told my mom, there's a small church in Montana. It's
Mhm.
like, you can sign up for free for 5 people
Yeah.
and have the full functionality of it. Like,
Yeah.
she's like, oh, you can? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
Such a great tool.
yeah. Those are, I mean, and then the social media stuff, but
Hmm.
I love, yeah, I think those are the two I would probably say are the most helpful, or the ones that I use as tools the most.
Yeah.
And I'm on Instagram a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I can throw your handle in the description too, so
Okay.
people can follow you.
Sure.
What is something current Ben wishes 2003 Ben or whenever you started?
Yeah. I think if I were to go back, and this is probably a very personal thing, but I think it speaks to anybody that is involved in what you and I do,
Mhm.
Curtis. And I think
Mhm.
we know how important it is to put the priority of our family above things,
Mhm.
and it can be sometimes difficult.
Mhm.
As much as we have knowledge and we can tell other people
Right.
this, but I think if I were to go back to me in 2003, I would just say, hey, it's okay to fight for your
Mhm.
family, for
Mhm.
the time with your family as your kids are growing and those
Mhm.
kinds of things. It's okay to do
Mhm. Mhm.
that, because I think for me, I would oftentimes put unspoken pressure or
Mhm.
unspoken expectations on myself that I never would
Yeah.
ask about.
Yeah.
Right.
Man, that's
Like,
good.
you know what I mean? So I
Mhm.
would say to myself, don't be afraid to ask the questions.
Mm.
Don't make assumptions about expectations of job or what you
Yeah.
need to be doing. It's okay
That's
to
good.
ask and challenge, because if you're working with and for um, positive leadership that really cares about the people they're leading, they'll listen and they'll want you to talk about those things. If they don't, then you probably need to pray about whether you should be in that
Mm.
spot, because it's probably long term not going to be healthy for your family and for
Right.
yourself. Now, I say that not because I was in an unhealthy
Right.
organization at all. It's
Right.
quite the opposite.
Right.
I'd say that to myself because I think sometimes, I would put pressure on myself without
Mhm.
having anyone say that. For
Right.
instance, I had, I for the first time, we're taking time off as a family in December because, like I mentioned earlier, we lost our oldest daughter.
Right.
She passed away on Christmas Eve last year. And
I
so
can't imagine.
we don't want to be here. We don't want to be in the
Sure,
house.
sure.
And I did what I thought was the unthinkable, which was ask, can I
Hmm.
not be here on Christmas? Right. And the response I got was like, yeah. And when was the last time you took Christmas off? Was the question I got. And I was like, we can take Christmas off. Right.
Man,
So
that's good.
and
Yeah.
so I was like, I didn't know that was
Right.
even an option. It's like,
Yeah.
well, we would always be willing to talk to you. Like, obviously you couldn't do it every year, but you know,
Yeah.
if you were to look at every
Wow.
4 or 5 years or whatever, I mean, yeah, we could make that happen. I'm like, I've been here for 20 years. I never asked, right?
Never asked.
I never asked.
I always say this: the answer to the question is always no if you never ask it. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a
Wow.
story and an
That's
illustration.
so good.
Yeah, that I would just encourage you guys for the health of your family. I say guys, but I mean that in the sense of women, men, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't hesitate to ask those questions. The health of your family is incredibly important, and the health for you is incredibly important. So you never know unless you ask, like you said. So,
man, thanks so much. Like,
Yeah,
this
man.
was a treat for me, and like, I just like. I kind of been following from afar.
Yeah.
And so thanks for taking time and sharing this,
Absolutely.
what you've learned over these years. And I think a lot of good stuff here. So
Thanks, man. Well, I appreciate you asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.